before all of this began, pretty much the whole world was turned into a capitalist system, right? Globalization, etc. And capitalism has had a psychological effect on human beings. For one thing, it's a profane system, a secular system, and we have been indoctrinated for over 100 years in a belief in scientism, materialism, consumerism, and an ever more dumbed down educational system that has caused us to lose our curiosity for higher truth, and we have also seen the corruption of the religious institutions that have caused us to justify our cynicism and our turning away from the traditional values that were the cornerstone and the source of strength and meaningfulness in human culture. So I want to talk a little bit about value, okay? So I'm going to refer to what I'm calling the 7 cubed axes of axiology. Now, axiology is the study of value. It's a long known, let's say, a sub-discipline of philosophy. For some, it's even a sub-discipline of ethics, but for others, axiology is primary and ethics derives from that. But I think we can also call it the Dao of Complete Capitalism. Okay, so my contention here is that the problem is not capitalism per se, but although what capitalism has done is shifted from the source of value, which in the classical world was the good, literally. Plato called it the good. In ancient Greece, the good or the one is the source of all value. Everything derives from the one. And so that which is most in alignment with the one, with the goodness that derives from that ultimate reality, gives us the understanding of what is valuable at the level of the phenomenal plane of life. But because it is all considered an emanation from the ultimate good, and the good then at the second level becomes the good mind of God, or the demiurgos, and the demiurgos creates, let's say, the blueprint of reality, what Jung would call the archetypes of reality. He would call it the archetypes of the unconscious. But really, it would be the superconscious of the mind of the mind of God, or the mind of the One, that then creates copies in the form of nature. Nature in its formed mode, natura naturata, as Spinoza called it, versus natura naturans, which is that level of the blueprints of what forms can appear in the ecosystems of the actual world. And then humans in our culture create copies of the copies. You know, we create gardens and we create buildings. We develop architecture that's in alignment with what we perceive to be the laws of nature, the Fibonacci series, and all of the other ways that we have understood nature to be coherent and expressive of beauty and of truth, that we then express in cultural forms. And these are the simulacra of those archetypal blueprints at that Platonic level of mind, forms, and of ideas that are reached by the sages, who then download them and deploy them as cultural artifacts and ideas that can be used in a practical form. So that was value, but then when capitalism came in, value became capital, and it turned into wealth. And wealth is always something that is related to power, to utilitarian purpose, and to egocentric perspective. So wealth became the new form of value, and wealth pertained to individuals that they could transfer to their families and their descendants if they wanted, but now value was privatized. And in the old cultures, there was a commonwealth, but now private property deprives the people of that commonwealth for the most part, and there is just individual wealth and a struggle for individual wealth and power. So we have valorized economic capital. And because we are now in a situation where the economies of most of the world are bankrupt, economic capital is vanishing. The US dollar, which is still technically the reserve currency of the world, is fast losing its value. And it only retains it in relation to other currencies because they have even less. But there will come a moment where that system will collapse and the dollar will be worthless. And so no matter how many dollars you might have saved up in your bank account or under your mattress, they won't be worth anything. And soon it'll anyway be Bitcoin or some other crypto, but that also will not be based on any system of value. Even gold will, since you can't eat it or drink it, will soon not be provide the basis for a system of economic exchange that will be required under the conditions that we will soon be facing. Now, another philosopher or sociologist, really, in the 60s in France, a man named Pierre Bourdieu, developed the idea of social capital and cultural capital. And in those days, it was a very simple idea, but it showed that economic capital was not the only form of capital that we could build up. And if we had enough cultural capital, we would be able to attract the economic capital that otherwise would not come to us. And the social capital. That became the focus for, let's say, the middle classes who were not able to amass huge amounts of private wealth, but according to who they knew, according to what connections you could make, you could find a niche in the society that would provide you with a certain income and with certain possibilities. But now even social and cultural capital is disappearing. And so we live in a situation where those forms of value and wealth and security that we depended on are gone. If you were an academic, you depended on having a university to teach in, but when they're closed, what do? The doctors used to be able to treat people according to their wisdom. Well, now you can't do that anymore. There are many cures, for example, for coronavirus that you're not allowed to use, even though you know it works. Your capacity to function in nearly all the fields that provided income are disappearing. The businesses that provided income for most people are gone. The restaurants, the theaters, nearly all of the socially based institutions, the pubs and all of the organizations that brought social capital into being have vanished. Right? So now we have an entirely different world where those options no longer exist. So the point that I am making is that every form of capital is vanishing except one form. And so therefore, the more we can amass that form of capital, the better off we are. So I want to talk to you about the forms of capital, the dimensions of capital, and the modes of production, manifestation, and enjoyment of capital. Whiteboard capital. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and of course we'll put 7 up a little bit later when we can erase and have a little more space. So first of all, let's talk about physical capital. And I'm going to propose that we have 7 kinds of capital. Well, the 7th, let's see, I'll put it here. Of course, it's spiritual capital. And my point is soon spiritual capital will be the only one left. So here we have, in physical, we have world conditions, body conditions, Umwelt conditions, sensual conditions, or degree of sensual gratification, sensitivity, sensibility, and sense. Okay? So those are the 7. So let me explain a little bit about them. I think we have already talked about world conditions, that they are not good anymore. They don't provide you with the kind of health and the kind of life that is worth very much anymore. The world has degraded, not only because of the lockdown and all of that, but just simply because of the destruction of the environment, and of course food shortages now that will be increasing, and the natural conditions. Look at all the wildfires happening in California, the floods in China, the locusts throughout Africa and Asia, right? We're seeing a world where the living conditions are now falling into a state where the value and the potentialities of life are being lost. One's bodily physical condition of health or of attractiveness might remain, but the conditions are leading to a deterioration even in that kind of capital. And the conditions are not looking very good for a healthy world. People can no longer even go to the gym in most cities in the world. They can no longer have the kind of exercise they took for granted, and people's lives have been impoverished, and bodies have suffered along with that. The sensuous richness of one's Umwelt, in other words, one has a personal environment that one has various kinds of beauty and let's say physical opportunities of enjoyment. Those are being taken away. People can't go to the neighborhood park anymore. They're shut away from enjoying what was available in their neighborhood and in their immediate life zones. So the life has become impoverished for most people. And because of the lockdown separating people, there's very little gratification of connectivity that's going on. People are very lonely, and they are very scared. So the sensitivity to these conditions, the people's, let's say, emotional immune systems are collapsing. They're becoming very sensitive to all of these changes and affected by them in a very negative way. Sensitivity can also be something very positive when you can sense the subtleties and the beauties and all of that, but when it becomes negative, everything that you are sensitive to becomes something that creates more despair, more sense of hopelessness. And one's sensibility, meaning one's ability to understand what is happening, is being lost in the confusion, the disinformation and misinformation, the conspiracy theories, the censorship of the internet, all of the kinds of things that are happening that are creating confusion in our sensibility. And sense itself, things don't make sense anymore to most people. And if you live in a world where nothing makes sense, it's very difficult then to plan your life or to avoid almost going mad. And I think that that's happening to many people. Sense, Heidegger defines sense as having two levels: existential and what has been called existential. And this term, existential versus existential, as in existentialism, is also common with many other philosophers like Karl Jaspers, etc. And it really means those particular assets and liabilities of one's personal life. The existential is more, how do I direct my life? What's my existence about? What is the meaning of my life? What do I want to accomplish? And all of that. Well, that's been lost because the ability to accomplish things and a world in which those things even existed to accomplish are gone. If you were an actor, your career is over. Most people's careers are over in whatever they were doing. And so the world no longer makes sense, and people have to kind of reinvent themselves, which is very difficult to do. Sens in French also, of course, means direction, like a sens unique, one-way street, or the dans le sens of the going with the grain. If you're a woodworker, right, you don't want to go against the grain. But now everything is against the grain. There's no more flow. There's no annealing. There's no way in which things can be coordinated and organized among lots of people. Very few communities still exist and are possible to be sustained because of the various obstacles that have been put in the way for people. So the physical capital has disappeared. I know that we're going to run out of time to get through all of these, So I'm not going to write them all down. I'm going to go through the others without writing them. But let me also talk about the dimensions of all of these. Can I have the eraser? Sure. So each of these values, these 7 forms of value that each have 7 modes of expression and enjoyment, also have 7 dimensions. Each one can be enjoyed on the horizontal plane, meaning simply as a phenomenal reality that's expressed socially or in one's life. A vertical plane in which one recognizes the possibilities of sublimating these values to ever higher levels to enable a more, let's say, a high level of artistry to be attained, a depth dimension in which one can perceive the kairos significance rather than the chronos, the significance of its relationship to the core values of life, and then the core value itself, or the central point of awareness of these different values and modes of wealth or capital. And then those famous Lacanian trio, that there's an imaginary way that these things get expressed in the form of artifacts of culture. There are the symbolic implications, the metaphorical significance that is implicit, and then that which is real, that which is transcendent, let's say, of the plane of its phenomenal expression. So I'm going to go quickly through all of these. The economic capital, which is mostly, of course, fictional, has these 7 modes. You can be born into old money, okay, which gives you a very different relationship to wealth than if you're born to new money or to no money. So the first one is past. The second is present economic capital, your current income. And your current situation economically. Then there's the future, which is your prospective economic and financial conditions. Then there's the liquidity of your economic capital, its degree of compounding of interest, if any, its multi-level nature. Do you make your money only from one level, or do you make it from the immediate profits plus dividends plus whatever other way in which you've arranged for income to come in, and there's lots of them if you're a good capitalist? And is there a diversity of sources of income, or were you stuck with one? So that's the economic capital, and I'm not going to go into all the details because probably not too many people have too much of it anyway anymore who are here. So, but it's a reality that those who do have some money and are in danger of losing it are starting to come out of denial about, and it becomes very scary to them. Okay, so then we'll go right on to the social capital. It's 7 modes. Were the quality of life you had in your family of origin? How traumatic was it? How cohesive was your family? How healthy? How much goodness? How much support for the development of your ego capacities and your soul capacities were you given. And so that's the family of origin. Then the current family you're in, or current partner, or current life situation. How good is it? What's the quality of it? How much support are you getting? How much recognition, understanding, compassion, etc. Then your friendships. Do you have friends? Do you have people you can really talk to about the situation and who get you? And then there's the whole social capital made up of your titles, the organizations that you belong to with whatever power they have, the licenses that you might have, the colleagues who have positions that can help you get jobs and sinecures of different kinds. And then next, the market for whatever is your social specialization, and your mobility. Can you shift to different places and use your skills in different ways and in different life situations? Most of that has been lost as a result of this pandemic for most people. Oh, and then finally, your diversity of options. Do you play in the little leagues or the big leagues, or some minor leagues? How big of a level of social capital are you playing with? Okay, then we go into intellectual capital, which has 7 modes. And this is your knowledge base, because we're in a knowledge economy in the West. How much historical knowledge do you have? How much philosophical understanding do you have? How aware are you of current events? How much specific knowledge do you have that enables you to succeed in your profession or your way of making a living? How exotic is your understanding? How much do you understand things that no one else does? And how integrative is your knowledge? How many dots are you able to connect and put together, and therefore creatively come up with new ideas that can get you to succeed in situations of adversity? And how pragmatic is your knowledge? How useful is it? How practical? There's a lot of knowledge that's simply useless and has no market value. So that's the intellectual capital. Then there's the psychological capital that has its 7 modes. One is, how much theoretical knowledge do you have about your own psychodynamics and the psychodynamics of other people? How much theory do you have that's accurate, okay? And then how much experiential knowledge do you have? How much can you actually get out of a bad mood by yourself, or a hysterical meltdown? Or are you dependent on other people and therapists to get you out? And can you help other people who are stuck in quicksand of emotional self-attacks and disastrous states of feeling? How much strength do you have to not only deal with the losses that we are all facing, but to help other people stand firm in the face of these situations that we will be dealing with without collapsing? How much balance do you have and agility of adaptation when you have to change your course in order to deal with changes in the environment that may be sudden and radical? How much humor do you have? How much joy and capacity of love do you have that can help you survive in situations that can be pretty dark? How much resilience do you have? How fast can you bounce back from a defeat or a loss? And what's the level of your epistemophilia, to use a Melanie Klein term? How much are you willing and able to learn, to know, to be able to face what will require a lot more knowledge than you currently have? Or are you stuck with a database that's obsolete? Most people, after they get to a certain age, they can't learn anything new. I think I'm partly in that category, unfortunately, at least when it comes to computers and things like that. But nonetheless, we are in a mode where we better be open to ongoing learning. Okay, so then there's cultural capital, which has its modes. Again, we're in a culture that is broken down, and that even before the pandemic, its nature had become fractured and fragmented into a classical, a modernist culture, and a postmodern, and various subcultures within the postmodern that all are very different. So some people have a great deal of canonic cultural capital. In other words, they can recognize classical music. They know Bach from Chopin, but they wouldn't know the Beatles from the Rolling Stones, or even the names of who's current, which I'm in that category. So, but if you're stuck with a canonic cultural knowledge base, but you don't have the knowledge that can relate to the culture that you might be in and stuck with and have to adapt to, you could be in trouble. And how much contemporary cultural adaptation do you have? How much do you get the current forms of cultural expression? How much strength of cultural commitment do you have to the development of your own vision of what human culture can be and should be? What is your capacity to reassemble? In other words, to create a cultural renaissance in the very face of the collapse of a culture? What is your openness to difference, to people of different cultures, and the ability to connect and create new cultures out of different fragmented cultural pieces? How open are you and able to bring cohesiveness to people who are from different cultural backgrounds and belief systems? What is your capacity to adapt to the emerging markets of cultural innovation? And how can you relate putting the old wine in new bottles, to use a very old cultural expression, or the maybe new wine into old bottles in some cases? And then what is the level of your own creative intensity and your own discernment of what has creative value outside of all of the cultural differences that has, let's say, eternal value? In any case, all of these modes of cultural capital are threatened now by the collapse of the general culture. And I think a cultural renaissance, it becomes an urgent necessity of creating something new that does not partake in what is dying, but that offers a new vision, a new hope, a new mode of moving forward in this time of death of a planetary civilization. So finally, we get to spiritual capital. Now that's what Sat Yoga is about, is helping you to increase your spiritual capital. That's probably the only thing we can be of any service to you with, but the perspective I'm taking is that spiritual capital is now worth more than all the other kinds combined if you can amass it and transmit it and share it and reproduce it and get it to be disseminated widely. So the first level of capital is divine love. Are you able to emanate divine love? Not specific love for a particular being or object, but that divine love that's unconditional and universal and real and authentic, not just talking it. And what's the strength of your inner luminosity? How radiant are you? What is the intensity of the inner light that shines from you and that is able to be offered to others? And what power have you achieved spiritually? Siddha. I don't mean individual siddhis, although those might also appear, the paranormal abilities, but that spiritual power that then gives birth to all of the other potentialities of the spiritual nature. How strong is it? And what is the stability of your spiritual status, let's say, as someone liberated or realized or at least master over the ego consciousness? Is it stable or does it wobble? Does it oscillate and collapse occasionally? And what is the actual intensity of your power? How much Shakti are you able to channel and contain and transmit remotely as well as in local space? And what is the level of genius you can download? What kind of ideas, inspirations, new understandings, new ways of organizing reality based on the will of God, not the human level of consciousness? And how much bliss are you in? Do you have the bliss of liberation, or is that just something that you're aspiring to and that you depend on outside circumstances or objects or people or chemistry to help you to be able to experience? So this spiritual capital is of urgent requirement to increase and to share. And the more that we do that, I believe that will become the basis of the new culture, the new world, the new order that will come about. But it really has to be authentic, and it has to be driven by love and that creative intensity of spirit itself, not a desire to harness it by an ego, but the actual surrender to the purity of spirit that wants to come through. Okay, I think that's the end of my rant for this evening because we're running out of time. How many people found that had any use value? Okay, it probably has no exchange value, so I hope it has some use value. But in any case, we will continue to be talking about the spiritual capital and maybe some of the others. But the point of Sat Yoga is to increase that mostly through meditation. And that means transcendent of the level of ego thought, because ego thought dissipates your energy. It scatters it. It gets entangled in negativity and in mundanity. And it doesn't allow you to bring in those higher levels of vibrational frequency and retain them and charge your batteries so that you become extremely powerful as beings of light that we are, and that we must again shine as and share with in order to light the world again and break through the cloud of depressive darkness that is covering the world and bring about a new golden age through the wisdom that we will have gained by going through this rite of passage of global cultural and social collapse, and even the loss of our physical environment that will no longer support life. And to recognize that the source of life is not nature, but is the God of nature, the source from which nature derives its being and from which all of us emerge. And to return to that source and to channel the power of that source back into the phenomenal reality by dreaming it again. All of this is a dream, and that dream has now become stale and exhausted. The quantum wave function that holds the world in place must be decollapsed. Freedom at that complete level of the unifying field of consciousness must return, and the world can and will be redreamed from that level of God consciousness to bring back the purity, the perfection of the beauty, the love, the joy that is our birthright and our power to recreate as soon as we return to the true nature of who and what we really are. So thank you all for being so kind and listening to all this, and hopefully we can all together make use of the knowledge that we all have about ourselves, about our relationship to nature and to spirit, and to really unify all of that psychological and spiritual energy into a single field of coherent power that will, in fact, redream the world as our child, our final cultural product that is the reflection of the joy, the love, the beauty, the goodness, the purity that all of us really have in our hearts, that now we have to pull out all the stops and let shine to the full.